Jargon. Hi, good evening, folks. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Anna.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing? It's Tracy
I'm
here.
good. Hi, Tracy. How are you?
Anna, Gary.
Surviving.
Hey, Gary. How are you?
Good.
Good. You got a beard.
Yes, I do. My
goodness.
Lockdown 2.0.
All right.
Welcome, Gary.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to be quiet for a bit while I just let people in.
Can you name again?
Come on, just stay there.
The overhead light on. Amy? Hmm? Yeah, that would be better. Hopefully.
Okay, folks, I'm just going to mute myself for a minute just while I'm doing the admittances. Just feel free to talk amongst yourself.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Beck. Is that you? It's Tracy here. I'm on phone tonight.
Can anyone hear me?
Alwyn's here for a change. I can hear you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, welcome folks that are joining. I think we're going to wait until about 5 after to actually start, just to give people to join a little bit late. Maybe not quite 5, maybe not quite 5 after.
He has to clean up as well.
I think maybe if everyone could mute just for a bit while we admit folks, that would be great. So folks, while we're getting started, I'm actually going to ask you, if you do have questions that you know you want to ask, you can feel free to start adding your name and just a theme for your question in the chat if you're on Zoom via the web. I also will be making some space for folks on the phone who may have questions at various points in the evening. But I will hold space for them separately. And Patrice is going to help us figure out, hi Patrice. Patrice is going to help us figure out how to bring people's questions forward a little bit later in the dialogue.
Yes.
It's a bit of an experiment and we're in it together.
Yeah, we're in.
So folks who aren't muted, if you can mute yourself just for a bit, please. And I'm just going to give it until 7:05.
No.
I was gonna, I just don't know about the
Rob, if you can start just at 7:05, be awesome. And
Perfect.
I'll just keep letting people in as you do.
Okay, sounds great.
I don't know if I'm on mute. The meeting for Birchcliff.
want to be
Rob, if you could do a housekeeping note at the beginning about muting, because I think it's going to be hard to hear.
For sure.
Okay.
Okay, I think we will get started. It is 7:05. We'll keep letting folks in to the meeting as we go along. As just a housekeeping note, as Anna mentioned, if you could mute for now, and then when it's time for questions, we'll ask you to unmute and we can go from there, but it'll help if everybody puts mute on at this point. I want to welcome you to the Birchcliff Village Community Association's Town Hall. I'm Rob Carmichael. I'm a member of the association, and I also happen to live at 25 Birchcliff, very appropriately. Tonight we're going to be discussing the serious concerns our community has regarding the upcoming or proposed development by Altree Developments at the Lenmore Court, 1615 to 1641 Kingston Road in the 50 and 52 Birchcliff Avenue. And I think we'll also probably bring in some of the broader concerns that we have around the development in the Birchcliff area in general. We're very pleased to have our councillor, Gary Crawford, tonight's discussion. And Gary, I just wanted to acknowledge that you've probably had a long day already. And thank you for agreeing to participate in the evening. I know that residents tonight are hopeful that you can respond to the pressing questions that we have as community members about the development. And the larger one, it's the one that we're referring to, of course, so there's a lot going on, but the one that we're referring to specifically is the one from Lakeside to Birchcliff on the south side. I think that in general, Gary, we're hoping that we can have and for everybody, we can have a constructive and full discussion. And we're looking for your understanding as our counselor and as our representative to understand our concerns, and as well to seek, we're frankly going to be seeking a robust commitment from you to work with the community and to ensure that any developments that come to Birchcliff, including this planned one, are responsible and that put our community members first. And I think that's been a common conversation, is making sure we put Birchcliff community members ahead of developers, as we are the ones who live here and represent the area. I wanted to, one thing that the group, Gary, has met several times so far, and so just bringing everybody a bit up to speed. We've gone over a lot of the issues, and I'm going to go through them in a second and have some specific asks for you. But one of the things we wanted to highlight was speed. We're concerned about the speed at which everything is moving. We say this because the developer proposal is going in front of the Community Council on January 6th for a preliminary report meeting. And I think we've tended to read in the publications and hear on news that there's a lot of time. And I want you to know that we actually don't think there's a lot of time. That's not the feeling. The feeling is that things are moving very, very quickly, and that opinions and almost decisions are being made very quickly, that as preliminary reports are being seen by everybody, that those opinions start to get set. And that we make sure we have our concerns heard at this point. We feel that it's moving way too quickly at this stage. We know that the initial opinions have been provided. We know that intensely reviewing right now. And we know tenants at Lenmore Court were approached earlier in the summer via letters and Zoom meetings by the developer, and that a member of the city planning was informing them of building and potentially moving tenants elsewhere. So we're concerned that these communications happened months before the proposal had even been submitted to the city, and it seems almost like it was a foregone conclusion. Equivalently, nearby neighbors being encroached upon were also made aware of what was happening months and months before it was openly discussed and a proposal was made to the city. It feels like this is much more than just a sketch. It feels like this is much more than just early in the process. The developer has spent presumably millions and millions of dollars accumulating multiple properties. They've spent presumably hundreds of thousands of dollars on reports, and they don't do that lightly. And so this feels that it's way further along than perhaps most people on this call are comfortable with. We're really happy to have you here tonight, and we want to learn more. We want to clearly understand what you know about this development and the developers, and specifically and directly what perspectives on this development are. And we're going to be seeking commitments for action from you. We're going to open up questions in a second, and that'll be the next stage. And there's lots of questions out there in a town hall format. Before we do that, I just want to list out, we've put together 5 specific asks, and we're going to formally provide this for you, of course, but just so you know where we're coming from, and I'll just read the highlights. The first ask that the association has agreed upon is to prevent the displacement of Lenmore Court tenants. The second is stopping encroachment and rezoning of residential streets, in this case, particularly Birchcliff Avenue. Third, limiting the density, width, and height of this development and future developments, keeping within the 4 to 6 story idea that's out there and that's been planned in zone. Number 4, protecting safe traffic flow and school intersections, in particular at Birchcliff and Kingston Road in this case. And number 5 is reducing the strain on our Bluffs environment and our community infrastructure. Everything from schools and public transportation to traffic. These are all huge concerns, and not the least of which is this is the spot on Kingston Road that is the closest to the actual bluffs. The bluffs come up markedly here, and we're concerned about the groundwater and so on. So those are the 5 general asks, Gary, and I think you're going to hear a fair bit around those particular concerns in the questions. And I'll leave it there. That's sort of the setting of what we've done so far and what our concerns are and what we're hoping from you tonight. Again, thank you very, very much for spending time with us. And I'm going to pass it over to Anna Dura-Gully. And Anna will take it from here with some specific questions for the association. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rob. Rob, I've made you host. If you could now make Patrice host. And Patrice, you can mute everybody if you can, except for me and Gary, just for a minute. And then you can unmute people as you choose to select their questions, if that's okay, just I think to keep it a little bit more sane. And we may just need a second while we practice this. So just give us a moment. Be able to do, just let me know when you've done that, Rob.
Anna, I am actually not sure.
So on the right, you'll see participants. If you find Patrice's name, you'll be able to click more, and then you can say make host.
Got it.
Okay. Awesome.
Done.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. Hi, Gary. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it. And thank you, Rob, for the intro and for sharing the asks of the Community Association that we've been kind of talking about and working on for a little bit now together. I think it's important to kind of say that we have been working to try to represent what are really a cross-section of issues, but that are connected to each other. And so despite the fact that we have 5 asks, I think we see them as connected to each other, and that this development is one that I think has sparked concerns for a number of reasons. We haven't given you an opportunity to kind of share your perspective yet. So before we kind of get into the open part of the town hall, I would just like to give you a chance, Gary, just to kind of maybe talk about your general position on this development. Share with the community members, what your perspectives are on it, if you have an official position at this point. And then I have one more question, and then we're going to, just from a housekeeping perspective, we're going to turn it open to really an open town hall. We haven't pre-planned an order of questions or anything like that. Patrice is going to man the questions and try to call ones up to keep the conversation moving. And I would just ask as a quick kind of request to try to keep them to be questions that Gary can realistically kind of answer here, and to try to keep it kind of a decent tone so that we can keep it and to take up a reasonable amount of space. Okay, so Gary, do you want to start by just sharing, your position on the Lenmore Court development, how you feel about it, what your reaction to it is?
Yeah, first of all, Anna, thank you very much for the invitation tonight. Rob, thank you for the introduction. I do have sort of an introduction remarks. My hope is getting through. I'm going to talk about really the process, some history, development broadly, to try to give people some context of this particular development. So once I do that, and hopefully out of the introduction, I will hit on a number of the questions that have been asked, but also probably will be asked, and then we'll get into that. But first of all, I do want to thank you, Anna. I want to thank the Birchcliff Village Community Association for being here, everybody being online. I can't express how important it is to have strong community associations in communities. You bring a voice, a unified voice, a strong voice, to the process, whether it's development or any other kind of issue in the community. So I want to thank the Community Association because your voice is incredibly important. And Rob, as you said, we're here really to talk about the Altree application at 1615 and 1629 and 50 to 52 Birchcliff Avenue. But we'll probably chat about development and other issues as we go through the night. Scarborough, just to let you know, and particularly Scarborough Southwest, Ward 20, and even Birchcliff is probably one of the busiest wards in all of Scarborough. I've heard from planners, probably one of the busiest areas east of Yonge Street for development applications. Now that means infill, which are small, just house applications for renovations and larger developments. So it is a community that is very desirable. People do want to live here. We have been living in this community. You have been all living in your houses for many, many years. You know why you moved in here. You know why, and you know what's really wonderful about this community. But I think a lot of people have found and recognized the wonderful aspects of this. So you look at the community. You look at what drives development. The market, in essence, drives development. We have a very hot housing market. We have a very hot market-driven housing market at this point. And that's what is driving a lot of the development right now. And I'll get into some more of the detail in a few minutes. But again, tonight really is the first of a consultation process, a long consultation process. When I do development applications, and I've done a number of them in Birchcliff already, the manually be one example, I do want to consult. I have this attitude of consult, consult, consult. Rob, I'll talk a bit about this preliminary point. I do have to say, I respect that you think this is going too fast, and I'll get into some of the explanations of why we are at a very beginning of a long, long process. But I guess the question is how do we shape the change? How do we balance the needs of what you as a community want and need? And then how do we develop the balancing between, development that has to happen? And you look at revitalization, you look at economic development, you look at local business supports, and what is the best way to be looking at it? Not sure if that's a little puppy or
There's a squeaky toy that might be.
Can somebody mute?
Yeah, you know what? We're going to try to do. I'm just going to pause for a second, Gary, and we're just going to switch hosts. Patrice, could you make me host again? If you just click on me, and I'll figure out a way to mute everybody.
Okay.
Sorry, folks.
The culprit seems to be a landline, someone who was on their phone.
Oh, it was?
Yes, that's what seems to be happening. Yeah.
Okay.
To mute a phone, I believe it is #6.
But the actual person has to do it rather than me being able to do it. Is that right?
I think you can do it. Anna, did that work?
It is no.
It says that you're host.
Yeah, I'm host. I'm just now trying to see how to mute everybody. Oh, there we go. There we go. And then I'm going to unmute Gary and myself in a minute. Gary, you can unmute yourself now.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me okay?
There we go. That's perfect. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Anyway, what I want to do, I just want to give a quick rundown on a brief history of Birchcliff. I think some of you who have lived in the area know exactly what I'll be talking about, but I think it's important that you really get a sense when you're looking at Birchcliff, and this goes to a lot of different other areas along Kingston Road. But prior to about 10 years ago, there was very little development that happened along Kingston Road. You had Henley Gardens, which was put in a number of years ago. And then the other was the Fallingbrook condo. That's the condo just on the north side, the 6-story on just by Fallingbrook. And that was really it. There really wasn't a lot of development happening. You had Kingston Road, which was an old, tired road highway. Didn't really reflect the needs of the community. There was really not a lot happening other than cars going back and forth. About 10 years ago, it actually started about, I think, 12, 15 years ago with the community prior to me being councillor with former Councillor Ashton. Began a study, which was a Birchcliff study. And I know a number of you as I said, are online, how we're involved in that. And that really was an opportunity for the city to sit down, the community to sit down and kind of vision or revision what they wanted to have for the community. Recognizing that there were a lot of businesses that were closed up. There was really no activity on Kingston Road, and it really wasn't active. It really wasn't engaging. It wasn't a walkable kind of environment. So the community went through a study, which was the Birchcliff study, and that really looked at rezoning the entire area from really Victoria Park all the way over to Warden. There were lots of charrettes. There was lots of community involvement. And I think out of that, this study came in, and if anybody wants to get online, you can have a look at that and read that. I won't get into all the details, but in essence, what they did is they rezoned the entire area, primarily from 4 to 6, 6 to 8 story condominiums or buildings all along the stretch. And again, you're starting to see 4 or 5 years later that realization of that kind of vision. But again, so that sort of set the stage, gave the sort of canvas for what you as the community 10, 15 years ago were hoping to see. So that's really a big part of the development in Birchcliff right now. And again, why was this done? I mean, it was done because you wanted to have input into your community where you live, and you pre-zone this. So what that means is we pre-zoned pretty much every area in Birchcliff, and then if a developer comes in and works within what I call a zoning box, a pre-zoning box, they can develop or build whatever has been pre-zoned. And there's a number of applications that have gone through on Birchcliff, on Kingston Road, that didn't have any community consultation, because in fact, they met the zoning or the pre-zoning that the community and the city had designed. So there's applications happening, and that's been going along. What happened again, this was about 10 years ago. If you recall, and this is when I first became the councillor for the area, we had the Kingston & Co. building, which is the sort of white building almost across from Henley Gardens over by Blantyre. That was probably the first building that went through a complete application process and was built out of the Birchcliff study. So that was the first one that actually started a lot of development all along Kingston Road. In fact, when I met with developers 9 years ago, that was probably the first development application east of Victoria Park for any kind of development. I think back then developers were really only focusing on downtown. There wasn't a market out in this area. And that was literally the first one. Times have changed recognizably in the last 10 years. But one of the things I want to talk a bit about, and this sort of puts into context of what is happening right now. And what drives development? Why is the development happening? And I mean, the obvious answer, which is, we have 30 to 50,000 people moving into Toronto every year. We need to figure out where to put them. There are certain plans, there are certain policies that guide all of this. Number one is a provincial growth plan. That is up to the provincial province government that sets that out. And really what the provincial growth plan, in a nutshell, it's a very dense document, but it really looks at, we have to, and this is not just Toronto, all municipalities, we want to build up, not out. We want to protect green space. And when you're looking at the green belt that is around the city of Toronto, we want to be able to protect that. So what the provincial growth plan says is we want to have density up. We don't want to have it out, because we still need to put these 30 to 50,000 people a year somewhere. And so you have that. But then underneath that, you have what's called the Toronto's official plan. In that plan, you have a number of guidelines. You have tall building guidelines, you have mid-rise guidelines, which are critically important on Kingston Road. And then you have zoning studies like the Birchcliff study that happened. So with those three kind of overlying policy directives, that's what drives development in the city, and in fact, all across municipalities in the province. But again, where do you put everybody? Downtown, you see what has been happening downtown. It goes up. There's height, there's density, there's condos. And it's tall buildings. That is what's been happening. And you see the results of that over the years. Out in the suburbs, and that's when you're really kind of looking Birchcliff, working your way out, maybe the beaches in some respect. Density will happen in certain areas. So the Toronto official plans say we will put density in, but where we want to put it in is in areas such as avenues, Kingston Road, St. Clair, Eglinton, Lawrence, and transit hubs. So wherever there's transit in the city, whether there's subway stations, we will look at intensification in those areas. And we will look at like high density around really subway and transit hubs. And then what you have out of that, I'm not going to get into all the details. It's just, but we will in the new year. I'm going to invite planning out to really give a more of a one-on-one planning. But what you have in these different zoning areas, you have commercial, you have industrial, you have employment, and then you have residential. And that'll be important when we talk about Kingston Road and the mix between residential, the mix between mixed commercial and employment lands. So what we have, and as I said before, we have a zoning box. It's based on.
Gary, if I can just say, I'm just going to ask if you can just spend just like maybe no more than another minute, because I would like to get to some direct questions. I can see them mailing up in the chat.
No, I appreciate that. And again, part of this then is it's trying to give the context of the process. And I'll talk a bit about the process as we get into the questions. But again, and not that you're going to hear me say it a lot, but I think process is incredibly important, and we just need to be clear on that. So bottom line, when I'm looking at the Altree court, or the Altree Lenmore court, and I want to include days in too, because that's also part of the conversation. Even though we're dealing with the one building in Birchcliff, it actually is tied to the days in, which is over by the Kingston Rd and Danforth. And I want to be clear with everybody just to start the conversation. If this application in its present form was brought before council now, I would not be supporting it. My colleagues would not be supporting it. I'm pretty confident that city planning would not be supporting what you see presently. Number one, it's too dense, it's too high. There's huge impacts on the community, impacts on the neighborhood, and of course, those two houses on Birchcliff. And at this point, there's no plan for a rental displacement. What you will see is a final submission in about 2 or 3 years that will not be this application. We do have to begin a process, and this is a long 2 to 3 year process. If anybody, and I'll just go back to the Manderley, if anybody was involved in that process, that was about a 2 year process that we worked incredibly close with the community. There were lots of smaller community meetings, there were lots of large community meetings. So I wanted to talk specifically about that, but really when you're looking at development, it's about 3 things. It's about a partnership between the community, a partnership with the city, and a partnership with the development. All strong, good applications, depending on where they go in the city, whether it's here or not, has those 3 key anchors that will make it successful. So this is by far not a done deal. And I want to be clear with that. It may sound as if it's going too quickly, and it may sound as if it's fully along. It is not. And Rob, you did bring up the one question with regard to the preliminary report that is coming on January 6th. What the preliminary report really does, there are no decisions made that day. What it does, it sets out, number one, the start of the process and the start of the community consultation. So no decision will be made on January 6th, other than to outline an area of consultation. And what I'll end up doing is pretty much all of Birchcliff. So the applicant will have to start reaching out to the entire Birchcliff area, but no decisions. I have to be very clear with you, Rob. There will be no decisions made whatsoever. Staff have just seen this about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and it takes about a 6-month process for them to look at that. So I want to be very clear that this is just the process. I have one more comment, Anna, that I want to talk about with regard to the rental units, because I know that's been a concern with some of the residents who live on Lenmore. There is a very defined and regulated process for rentals in the city. And first of all, I fully support the tenants' rights to preserve their ability to live in their houses. What we do have is a rental housing protection demolition control bylaw. And I will read, and I appreciate a few extra minutes, Anna, because I think it's very, very critical because I know a lot of the questions are going to become, but I do want to read a bit from the rental housing protection demolition control, because this will give a sense or a context of the concerns that a lot of people are facing. And I'm just going to read this because I think it's probably the best way. The city's rental housing demolition bylaw prohibits the demolition of all or part of a building that contains 6 or more dwelling units without obtaining a permit from the city. Nothing will be moving, no decisions will be made for anybody in Lenmore Court until a permit and a decision from the city happens. If the demolition of 6 or more rental dwelling units with affordable and mid-range rents is proposed, replacement of the rental dwelling units is required with the same number of units, type of units by bedroom, unit size, and generally the same rent. And what is important is this tenure of replacement units will be secured for at least 20 years. So there will be securities in place for anybody that does have to move if this gets approved. And there will be assistance with tenant relocation, assistance, and all of that. But again, through this process, the rights of the existing tenants are to be protected, and their needs are to be taken into consideration by the city when determining whether to grant permission to demolish and replace an impacted rental dwelling units. We have a process that is separate from the development application process, and we've already started that. That will actually deal with this as a separate process, but it's a very detailed process. I just wanted to outline that to you if any of the questions come. So on that, I'm willing, and I guess just to open it up and see if there are any other questions.
So just before I open it up, I have one specific question for you. Thank you for giving us your position. And I'm just going to explain that from this point forward, I'm going to act a bit more as a facilitator, which means I will probably interject quite a bit to try to get questions happening and to move through. And I may also follow up on questions where I want a more pointed answer. So I appreciate that's just the kind of a format note from this point forward. Okay, so the one particular question that a number of people have asked, and I've been asked to kind of bring forward to you is, you know, at what point did you start having conversations with Altree Development? How long have you known about this development? And I think one of the reasons that this question has become so pertinent to many of us is that it has a lot to do with the order of events here and the fact that tenants were approached about the move into that new building in the summer, you know, a couple of months before a proposal had actually been filed. And apparently a city planner was present in some of those early discussions. And so I think just for a matter of kind of getting the facts on the table, there are many people on this call tonight that would like to better understand the facts and when you first, you know, came to be aware of this development and the goals of the developer.
Thank you, Anna. So I did have a meeting with Altree Development. I don't have the exact time, but do you recall, I guess, when they put up their website where the community really found out about this particular development? So I don't know what the date was. I know it was a couple of months ago. I would have met with them about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks earlier. It was just a courtesy meeting on a proposal between, again, the property in Birchcliff and the Days Inn. It was about a half-hour meeting. Again, it was just to go over generally, here's this idea, here's this plan of what we're looking at doing. And recognizing that I do meet with a lot of developers, people who are interested in all kinds of development all across the ward. So it's not uncommon for somebody to call me up, and it's also not uncommon for somebody to call me up. But when developers call, of course, I have an open door. I want to have a look at what's coming in. So as I said, I think it was 6 to 8 weeks prior to when this became public. And they showed me what this vision was. I didn't make any comments on it other than it looks quite big. I did ask them, have they approached planning? Have they had any conversations? And this is prior to be putting in an application. So there is a process prior to putting in a formal application. It's called a pre-application process. You can actually talk to planning just informally. I'm really very rarely involved in that process. But again, so I asked them, have you approached planning? And when are you looking at putting in an application? At that point, with that meeting, they couldn't give me a firm answer. They weren't too sure, but again, it was just a courtesy meeting. Again, I looked at that and, you know, I had my own personal opinions on the size and all of that, but I didn't really say anything or make any comments at that point. The one thing I did mention to them, I said, listen, what's really important is that you reach out to the community. You get the community involved as soon as you can, prior to an application going in or after an application is going in. I said, I say this to every developer, you consult. You have to ensure that you get, you know, the way I work with things, and and everyone else, I want to build consensus. And that's what I told them. Reach out, please reach out to the community. They had no obligation to that. If as part of the planning process, surprisingly, it's only legislated to have one community meeting and then one meeting before community council. That's it legislatively. I ensure that every developer goes out and meets more than that. They gave me that commitment, and I said, before anything happens, before you post anything live or do anything like that, please make me aware of that, because then we can start reaching out to the community. Unfortunately, what happened, I saw the post or the face or when the website went out, when you all saw that, because I started getting phone calls to my office. Again, I was not, I'd asked them not to do that. I said, listen, let's reach out. Let's have some small conversations with at least the people who live on Birchcliff and over on the other road. So I just forgot that at this moment. But to do that, unfortunately, they didn't do that. And again, this is what's happened. You now have a large website out there that is pretty much showing a vision of only what the developer wants. This is not the vision of what the community wants. This is not the vision of what the city wants. This is kind of what they want. And they take a risk because there's no approvals right now. They're coming saying, this is what we want to build. We as the community and the city may turn around going, we're not going to let you do that. And they're going to decide what direction they want to go. So that's kind of just in a nutshell where and when I first met them and how this came about.
So 6 to 7 weeks before it came out in the public domain.
Approximately, yeah. It was about, again, a 20-minute, half-hour meeting, no more. I generally, with our planning, I do reach out to our planning staff on a regular basis to, can you give me a heads up? Has anybody approached you? There's no formal process or method to do that, but I try to ask that plan. So if they heard, and again, recognizing we're also in a pandemic, so it makes things a little bit difficult to have these sort of meetings, but I always try to get a sense of what is coming in the community. And there are other developments, that I kind of, you have to recognize too, when I meet with a developer, big or small development, there's no guarantee that they are actually going to do an application. In fact, I would say about half the people I meet with never put in applications. They're just sort of fishing for, would the council support this? Would the community support this? Would planners support that? So about half the times I meet people, they never put in an application. They're just trying to gather information. So you never know. So Altree sounded as if they were pretty serious, because you're right. I'd realized that they'd spent a lot of money. I asked them, have they purchased the house? Have they purchased the days in? And they had interest in all of that. So I recognized then that, yes, they were serious, but nothing had happened at that point.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to the floor, and I would be grateful. I'm going to ask Patrice to, I'll try to unmute Patrice. So she can help me here. I've sent you a note to unmute Patrice, so if you can unmute yourself. There you go. There
All right.
Okay,
Great.
awesome.
Okay, so I'm just running through the chat here, and I'm just going to sort of go in order of the questions that I am seeing. There's one from Brian McConnell. So I don't know if he wants to unmute and ask his question about the city collecting development fees and how those are used.
Go for it, Brian.
Hey, I don't think that was me.
No? Okay.
No,
Okay, well, somebody has asked that question. I'm sorry if I've got it mixed up. Anyway, there was a question asked about whether the city is collecting development fees, and is it put back into our community, or is it just the Scarborough ward in general?
So quickly, and thanks whoever for asked the question. Yes, development fees are actually collected on every development that happens across the city. And primarily for two reasons. One is, so development fees pay for development. They pay for the entire process. We have a planning department that I think we have about 340 planners all across the city and about 150 planners. So development will pay for that. What development is supposed to pay for is the infrastructure. So if you want to put a development into anywhere across the city, that development is responsible for the infrastructure. Again, when you're looking at roads, when you're looking at sewers, when you're looking at water, everything is supposed to be paid for through the development fees. Now, recognizing that that's a broad policy statement, it doesn't always work in practice, but generally development fees pay for that. And they're quite substantial that a developer would pay. They pay, there are a couple of other development, and I'll break up, there's two specifically that impact the community. They're called Section 42 and Section 37. So Section 42 development fees are parkland dedications. So a developer, you put in a development, and I'll use Altree as an example, they are required as part of legislation to put in open space or parkland in the development. When a developer can't do that because of the size of the restrictions, sometimes downtown when you're putting up these big buildings, you just can't find open space or park space, but you have to pay for the right to do that. And these parkland dedications are actually, so when they're paid, they actually stay in the community. So any developer along Kingston Road will be paying these Section 42 development fees if they can't put in parkland into the development. And again, that is used for parkland dedication space. You know the fitness pod that was just approved and was going in over to at the Birchmount Community Center? I think there was a Facebook post. That was being paid for out of development fees by one of the developers. The other part of development fees are Section 37. Now, Section 37 fees are very much called community benefit fees. So when a developer, and a good example, and I'll go back to Altree, on that particular site, you're allowed to put in a 4 to 6 story building as part of the pre-zoning. With that, there are no Section 37 fees. But if you go beyond what is expected from the city and the community, and just using Altree, say, well, actually, no, let me use Manderley. It's probably a little bit easier because Manderley did go beyond what the city required as part of the zoning. I forget if it's 2 or 3 stories, but a Section 37 was negotiated for $500,000 on that site because they got more than what the the city asked for, and that money goes directly back into the community. And it usually is spent within about 1 kilometer or 2 kilometer space. So we do now have, with just the Manderley, $500,000 that at some point we'll be looking at what are we going to be doing in the community with that. And I'll be reaching out to the community for you to determine that. Blantyre Park is another good example. So Blantyre Park, if you live in the area, we are going through a reimagining of the park. And where we're getting a lot of that funds is through Section 42 and Section 37. I'm going to be using some of that to actually revitalize Blantyre Park. But all of those funds, those monies on those development fees stay in the community.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Patrice, I'm just going to ask one follow-up question, and then I think we're going to have a question from Karen before we go to the broader audience, okay?
Okay.
Gary, the Manderley you've brought up a couple of times in your remarks, and I think that, you know, that development specifically is one that I think has brought many of us concern about the consultation process for this development. I think many of us, including me, but many more than me, were involved in that consultation process. And I remember well having very robust discussions with the original developer of CORE about the community use that could, and the community benefits that could be given from any of those Section 37 funds. I remember conversations about park space, about ice rinks. I remember that there was a strong, conversation with the architect at some of the original consultation meetings about sympathetic design to the community. Those were hours that people spent sharing ideas. And then, I think many of us feel, I live right around the corner from the Manderley, that without very much warning, that development completely and fundamentally changed shape. And we're concerned, about how we can trust a consultation process that seems to be broken. So if we can have these robust dialogues and be invited in, seemingly in good faith by a developer to have consultations about what the building should be to be suitable to the community and compatible to the community, but then also what those benefits should be to the community. And then, we have suddenly a different developer and we've lost the thread on where those community benefits that we negotiated have gone. And further, that development itself looks fundamentally different. None of those design features exist in that building anymore. I think one of the reasons that people were so quick to, mobilize about this particular development, particularly as we saw it moving quickly forward and with no sense that there was going to be that same sort of forward-looking consultation, is if a developer's, that is consultative, can flip a project and we can end up with a completely different building without those community resources. What is it going to be like when we're dealing with a developer that just quite frankly seems to be bulldozing us in terms of their, methodology for engaging with the neighborhood? And so I think, that is a good chunk of the reason why people are concerned here. I'm just going to leave that as a comment for now. If you want to respond to that in a minute, I'd like to get to Karen and then we can come back to that in a moment, if that's okay. Karen,
sure.
Over to you. Let me see if I can unmute you.
I got it. Thanks. Hi, Gary. This is Karen. I'm a tenant at Lenmore Court. And I just wanted to say that in your opening statement, you outlined why this is happening. I completely understand. I think many of us do. I personally am not against development. I'm fully on board with giving Kingston Road a facelift. One thing that stood out though is you mentioned that in Birchcliff, we moved here because we love the area. We have a great community. It's a great place to live, great place to raise your kids, just a great place all around. And that includes me. I have built a community. I'm part of a community that I support. I service them with my business, and I don't want to leave. I don't want to be displaced. Now, I've noticed that in the stretch of a VP and Birchmount Road, ours is the only proposed development which will be facing a demoviction of residential tenants on a large scale. So Gary, I have two questions for you. One is, what is your stance on displacing of tenants, some who have been here 30 years or more and are on fixed incomes?
So first of all, thank you for the question. So this will be the first, I guess, demoviction that I have been involved in as a councillor. It has happened over the city a number of times. Regent Park would probably be the best example. So this is the first time I'm actually going through this process. So it's a learning process for me as well. But as I said in my remarks, I'm really focused on the rights of you, Karen, and all the tenants in Lenmore Courts right now. That's a critical, important aspect of moving forward. And as we move forward, looking at what your rights are. Now, so part of that, so this plan, they have, suggested that so they will be building a rental building over with the Days Inn across from the Cenotaph. And that's where all, their thought process is the units in Lenmore will be displaced and relocated over into the Days Inn site. There'll be more rental units in there. There'll be some affordable, there'll be some market, but that was their plan. Now, the cities needs to look at that when as part of our planning process, and I'm pretty sure we've already, and the planner, by the way, is Allison Smith. So she would have reached out to the tenants outside of recognizing what the developer says to you and what the city says to you are two different things. So I always look at what the city says. They'll be looking at a number of different factors and things like distance away. I mean, the policy states that you, number one, if they were looking at moving you for a period of time, like Regent Park, but giving you the right to move back, they would do that. They'd have to pay for the cost of you staying in a place for the period of time. But then we look at, if you're displacing somebody, we look at what's critically important is we do not look and we do not act favorably to displacing somebody outside of the community. Now, again, when you're looking at, so the big thing that the city planners look at are school zones. So if you happen to have a child who's going across the street to Birchcliff Public School, and you're looking at going over to the Days Inn, you're going to a different school zone. We do not look at that lightly. That is a very serious concern for the city when we're looking at that process. So we will look at, the distance. I think it's about 1.5 kilometers, maybe 2 kilometers away, whether or not that's an appropriate distance away from the community. From my perspective, you have two different communities. You have Cliffside, which is where the Days Inn will be, and then you have Birchcliff. So just from my perspective alone, I find it very challenging and difficult to support the notion of what Altree is suggesting is, in fact, this is in the same community, even though it's 1.5 kilometers. But again, these are the kind of things that we'll be looking at as part of the consultation. And as I said, ultimately, the city will be giving a permit or not to these. And again, there are a number of different parts of this application that are challenging. That is one of the biggest ones that we have before us right now. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. I know that we have our rights. Altree in our first meeting explained that to us. And of course that raised different concerns. So thank you for confirming that. So seeing now that you don't approve of the Days Inn and moving us out of Birchcliff into a totally different area, what would you like to see happen? How are you going to advocate for the Lenmore Court tenants? What would you like to see happen to us?
Well, ultimately what I'd like to see is if in the event, so say there is a development that does take place there, we won't get into the size and density, but I mean, right now it's only a 4 to 6 story. So if they decide to come in and put a 4 to 6 story, I want to ensure that each and every tenant is treated, number one, fairly, respectfully, and supports and agrees to whatever conditions on a move to say the days in would be. So ideally, I'd want you, and again, recognizing you again, moving into a new building, you'll have the same kind of unit, you'll have the same kind of rental that you're paying. But I would like to have support and really consensus from everybody in there. That would be my goal as we're getting through this process.
So you would advocate for us to come back into a building that is built in this place?
Well, I ultimately, yes. And again, so I haven't had that conversation, or planning haven't had that conversation on whether or not they would consider putting rental units in that larger development. So that, again, that's a conversation that will happen. And the city will determine, as I said, is that 1.5 kilometers over to the Days Inn a responsible kind of move? And I'm just going personally for myself. So again, recognizing that this is the first time I've been dealing with this kind of an issue in the ward. I'm learning a lot myself, but just at this point, if I was to say, is this fair what the developer has proposed for you? No, it's not.
Okay, so Gary, I'm going to underscore that we have an ask as a group around the tenancy issue, and I'll just bring it back to the forefront now. And that is that there is no displacement with this development, which means that people living in those buildings retain a right to live on that property. Ideally, there's no dem eviction, and minimally they retain homes in Birchcliff, not in a neighborhood down the road. So, I think that's something that as a community association, we are hoping that you will fight for on the tenants' behalf. Thank you.
No, that's a reasonable request, and I do support that.
Okay, Patrice, do you want to send me some more questions? And then
Anna,
after, I think we're going to go to Janine.
There was some questions that were emailed in as well.
Yes, there are.
Did you, maybe Janine had a number, did you want to?
Yeah, I was actually going to come to Janine next. So I've connected with Janine in the chat. I had so many questions online today that I actually think it'll be easier for people to recirculate their favorite questions in the chat, and we'll pull them up. So I will come to Janine after Patrice pulls someone up. Thank you.
Yes. Actually, bringing around to what we were just talking about, if Tricia, if you're still on the line, you wanted to know about low-cost units versus having condos.
Tricia, are you there?
Well, I'm here. I'm not sure about that. My issue was that the residents are behind the tenants, as well as the tenants being important, and that my comment was about Regent Park and how they demo evicted people from there, and this isn't exactly the same situation, and that these people are, here and a part of the community and long-term part of this community. But no, I didn't have a question. I don't know.
Oh, I don't. There must be. Is there another Tricia that is on the line with us? I'm just going through the chat here, and it'll have. Here's one.
Plus, my chat got wiped out.
Oh, okay, so it's a bit confusing. So,
okay, why don't we go to Janine? Why don't we
let's go to Janine. Yeah,
we'll figure that out. Don't worry.
Okay.
Janine, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna, for pulling us together and advocating on our behalf. And Gary, thanks for being here tonight. My question as a resident at 34 Birchcliff, when we purchased our homes, it was with the knowledge that there was a 2-home, single-family residential dwelling buffer between us and Kingston Rd. And I want to get your position on rezoning the 2 residential properties on Birchcliff. From my knowledge, research, and speaking to both Yashan and Christian, although there have been some applications to date, there haven't been any amendments to the official plan and changing residential to multi-unit zoning. I just wanted to validate that that is in fact true and also get your position on that. And then I just have a follow-up question on traffic.
So thanks, Janine. I know we spoke a couple of months ago when you moved in, and if it was me, I would have been as shocked, moving into the wonderful community, finding out what was happening. So with regard to those 2 homes, I do not support any incursion into neighborhoods. Period. Blank. So that's my opinion. Our planners, you mentioned Yishan and Christian, who are two very, very competent planners, just to let you know. As part of our planning policy, again, when we're looking at the bigger picture of how, like on Kingston Road with development on avenues, we are willing and we do put in development on avenues, but what's embedded in that policy is protecting neighborhoods. If you've looked at one of those zoning maps where you will have the yellow colored map of a neighborhood, you'll have the red and orange colored of different zoning areas. We protect neighborhoods. That's a critically important aspect of this. And in fact, in the first Kingston Road study, again, 4 to 6 stories was allowed there, but it doesn't move into neighborhoods. This particular development, and there's another one actually in the ward right now over on Windy Ridge, which is in the east part of the ward, almost identical kind of application where very large, very big building. And the only way that they can make this happen is if they can change the official plan to be able to designate those 2 houses as part of the bigger unit. Planning are going to be looking at that specifically, and I don't know the rationale, or I don't know what the developer has said to planning or the rationale whether they want to do that. But I find it, again, planning will have a big challenge with that. I can guarantee that. Again, I haven't spoken with planning about this. They're still doing the reviewing, but that'll be the biggest challenge to really overcome whether or not planning would support that. So planning could turn around and say, no, we're not going to support that. I, as a councillor, could turn around and say, no, I'm going to not support that. And then they will really have to change what this development look like. Because frankly, looking at that, you can't get a 9 or 10 story without those 2 houses. You need that sort of density to be able to do that with a 45-degree angle. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge as we move forward. Now, recognizing that the other thing I have to talk a bit about too is we can go through this process with the community. I can turn around, council can, if they're pushing to get this particular development and they're not looking, there's no wiggle room. And we say no to this. I say no to this. Community, the city says no to this. They still have another avenue, which is through LPAT, or the equivalent of the old OMB. We don't always want to get down to that road because ultimately when a developer, and I don't think Altree's like that. I mean, I don't know this company that well. I don't think they're a developer that is keen or interested in just circumventing the process and taking it strictly to appeal. But some developers have. There's actually one on Kingston Road just down the street that in fact did that. We went through an entire process with them and boom, we had a community consultation over at the Birchcliff United Church. The day after that, they went right to appeal. They didn't even tell us. So I don't think Altree is like that, but ultimately we always want to ensure that that is always there. And again, I don't know, I mean, I'd have to ask a planner, I mean, what their opinion would be if Altree took this particular planning application right to appeal, whether or not they would get the approvals. I don't think so. Our planning department don't think so. So that's kind of where we're at. That's the biggest challenge of this development right now, those 2 houses.
So that's just to underscore another ask of the community, which is that we're seeking your support in fighting against encroachment on the neighborhoods. That we do not want to see any rezoning on this property down residential streets. And Janine, feel free to add to that if you'd like to, because I know you are the house most closely affected.
Yeah, I think that so obviously having the rezoning there, and I think the other thing that really is another one of our points is around the traffic and the fact that right beside our house would then be a driveway for 271 vehicles and 50 bikes, which would be directly across from 35 Birchcliff, which is a 52-unit luxury townhome, which would also have 52 or approximate, whatever that is, parking on our small street that only has 21 homes. And being on the south side of Kingston, there's not a lot of place for that traffic to overflow. So I guess my follow-up question is, with those 2 houses, would the consideration of rezoning them take into effect the fact that they'd be using that for a driveway and all the congestion and conflict points that would be on Birchcliff and then up at the lights where our kids go to school?
Yes, they would take that into consideration. And again, they do take into consideration the amount of units and again, recognize it. So if they did a 4 to 6 story, and by the way, if the 4 to 6 story came in within the zoning, we would be having no community consultation. In fact, we'd be able to do the permits, but because we want to do that. But no, because this is so large, because there are so many units, There will be studies that the developer will have to pay for. We'll peer review them on the city's transportation side to look at all of those impacts. You got, as you said, you got the school almost across the street. You have the impacts of what could happen on the street. So that will all be looked at as part of this planning process as we work our way through. And by the way, I just want to mention too, when you're looking at the process, planning have informed me, it's about, they need to spend about 6 months reviewing this particular application. And so we will get a better sense probably by the spring of where they are at in supporting this and the conversations that will be happening with Altree. Recognizing, so in that 6-month period, there will still be community consultations. Altree have confirmed to me that they are very much open to do community consultation. And that's just maybe an opportunity to talk about the comment you made about the Manderley. We are in the same timeline of a process in the planning where Manderley was a number of years ago. We are very new at the beginning. Where Brian Nicolasian and Cora gave the commitment to do these community consultations that you were involved in. Altree has also given their commitment to do that. So we're at the same part of the process, Anna. We are not, as you said, and I know Rob had mentioned that thinking things are a lot farther in the process. We're not. We're at the very beginning. So the goal now, again, recognizing that we're doing this in a virtual environment will be a bit challenging, but really in January, I'm hoping to sit down with Altree and planning and start having these small local conversations. And it would be, I mean, you know, on Lakeside and Birchcliff, people are most impacted, having smaller conversations with 6, 8, 10 people, and then having larger community consultations, very similar to what we did with Manderley. Now, again, Altree have committed to doing that. They're not Brian at core, but my hope is they'll have the same kind of commitment. Again, they don't have to do any of this if they didn't want to, but they have committed to doing that.
But Brian at core is no longer the developer at Manderley, and none of the design features or community features that were negotiated in those consultations have held out in the final development of Manderley. And so I think my comment was really a question about our trust, why we should have trust in this process, because I think many of us feel like we engaged very meaningfully in those consultations, and we took them at face value, you know, back at that early stage in the process, that we were being genuinely consulted and asked for our perspectives on what should be in the community. Yep. And that indeed any of those perspectives were being listened to. But now if you drive past or walk past the Manderley, you have a different building, a different design, and none of the community features. And so I think the point that I was trying to make is that shifted, you know, further down the process, and we want to know how to protect ourselves from a consultation process that goes the way that that one did.
Yeah, and again, let me comment on Cor and Brian, who I got to know quite well over those couple of years. It was always their intention and commitment to develop and to actually build that particular building. So that at the very beginning, they had intended to do that. There are developers, they will go through the entire zoning process, and you're right, flip it after that. That was not their intent. And I just want to defend Brian and Cora, because they actually have the townhomes that are just down the street that they're developing. And also they're doing a small townhouse complex over on Clonmore. So their commitment was very real. Brian and his partners actually lived in the community over by Fallenbrook. I think his brother lived in the area. So they had a commitment to the community. And that's what I really liked about that particular developer. What happened, as you were going through this long process, they incurred a number of costs that they weren't anticipating. If you recall, and I forget the gentleman's name who owned the antique store. If you in the community will understand when, again, I don't recall his name, went through a long process of trying to relocate that particular building. And Brian spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in trying to assist with that. There were delays for 3, 4, 6 months because we were trying to find this gentleman a new place to live with all of his, with the antique store. He had, in fact, 4 or 5 large trailers out in the back, and we were storing all of this. So there were a number of things that happened during the process. And unfortunately, again, I had the conversation I had with Brian is when we finished this, it went through zoning. There was I guess a community member, as I understand, decided to appeal this to the OMB, which, by the way, the community has a right to do that. So you as a community don't like whatever happens with this development here, you have a right to appeal that. But I do know when talking to Brian, that was kind of the last straw, because an appeal process costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it takes on another 6 months. So at that point, his partners, and it was really the financial partners who are the investors in that project, decided to pull the plug, and you have to sell that. So I just wanted to give you a sort of context of why that was done.
But can I ask, how come the consultations and how the consultations fed into that design? How come they weren't protected in the site plan?
So there are two parts, again, part of the decisions that are made. You have one process, which is the zoning process, and that really looks at, you know, what's happening with Altree, a rezoning. So that talks about densities, it talks about built form, it talks about the bigger things. It doesn't get into all the details of the site plan specific things, even though it is talked about through the process. So Brian had, I mean, they were looking at doing brick on the Manderley that was very similar to the church across the street. They wanted to respect the historical significance and importance of the community, but that wasn't part of the approval process. So council didn't approve the site plan application. The site plan application comes in the next process, and that's a little longer process where they look at all the fine details. The commitments from CORE were there, but the approvals were not embedded into the decision. Hence, when it turned over to a new owner, as much as they, you know, I had a quick conversation with them too, they were going to keep to the most extent, you know, everything that CORE talked about. They have had made changes, and they're still going through that site plan application to determine what will happen with the, but there's two separate processes between zoning and site plan application.
Okay, so, but I think you can probably understand why people are not necessarily reassured by consultation will help us solve this problem.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I totally get that.
Yeah. Is there someone else, Patrice, that we can ask? Or do you want me to try here?
Yes, I have a couple here. If we could just do John Hartley first, and then Rob had a question. So John, you seem to have a couple of questions running on the side chat. So why don't you go ahead in regard to acting on behalf of the community and the sewage studies?
Well,
John, can you, yeah, there you go.
Gary knows these questions. The schools are overloaded. That's right in the report. The sewers, we were just given documents recently indicating a $300 million expenditure proposed. And what that is about is an environmental assessment, which is replacing another environmental assessment that ran out 10 years ago. And that is all dealing with a problem that was identified by the city in 2003. So 2003 to 2020 or 2020, nothing has been done. Now we're going through another environmental assessment. And what it's all about is the flooding that's plagued the community. These are identified problems. So the question is, with respect to schools, with respect to sewers, with respect to roads, the infrastructure is inadequate. Nothing should be approved until the necessary underlying infrastructure is there. That's the question. Why do we approve anything when we don't have the basic infrastructure?
So let me be clear, John, and I think when we had the conversation a couple of weeks ago, I stated that, but as part of the process, as part of the application process, this developer and any developer has to show that they have the proper sewer capacity. So this development, whether it's, and by the way, with the Manderley, they did not have proper capacity themselves. They actually had to build capacity over to Warden for their particular development. That's the only way that we were going to prove that. Same with Altree. They will not get approvals unless they can show, and it's not just them, it's the Ministry of the Environment, it's our water department, that there is proper capacity for sewer capacity, water, all of that. So
why do we need to spend $300 million then if the sewer capacity is there? Because it's not. It's demonstrably not there. Okay, it doesn't exist. We know that.
So John, first of all, I mean, let me get to finishing the question with regard to sewer capacity, and you did mention schools. I'll get to the $300 million in a sec. So with regard to schools, I have been involved in developments I've been involved with so far in Birchcliff. In fact, I think the entire ward, there have been capacity in all the local schools. So the process, this application will be going off to the school boards, both Catholic and public. They will have an opportunity to review this. They'll review there's a formula that will suggest or state that there'll be so many students coming from each development. They have an opportunity to, inform the process whether or not they have capacity or not. And I do know that I haven't seen one of the school boards that has said we do not have capacity. They all have said they do have capacity. So that's the number one thing. If there is not capacity, so Birchcliff would be the example across the street. So if, this development will have an amount of students generated, and I don't know where Birchcliff is right now. I used to be the school board trustee, but I'm not anymore. So I don't know what the capacity levels are. Say they have no more room to put anybody in. There's a policy, and it's provincially legislated. The only thing we can do as a city is to inform anybody who's moving into that particular building that they may not be guaranteed to get into the school in the local community. In fact, they may have to find other means to do that. That's our only means of being able to, manage this issue. It used to be in years past, 20 years ago, that the city had the ability to ask developers that, no, in fact, with all this new development coming in, you have to build a school. We don't have that luxury anymore. So that's with regard to that answer. The 300 million.
What you're saying is you've fobbed that on. You're saying we don't have the jurisdiction to enforce anything to do with the schools, so we will ignore that issue. And in fact, the city did that at Eglinton and Young, which is the most egregious example. They posted up signs and they said, and they made people sign as part of their agreements of purchase and sale, clauses that said you are not guaranteed, your children are not guaranteed to attend the school. That's just bad planning. It's just plain bad planning.
Again, John, as I said to you a couple of weeks ago, and I'll say again today, we are not ignoring this. This is provincially legislated. This is all we as a city can do. It's not the right answer.
What you can do, clearly what you can do is not let anybody build until the necessary infrastructure is there. That's not provincially legislated. That is what you can do.
So with regard to the $300 million expenditure, now I guess back in, I don't even know when it was, but a number of years ago, we had the floods in Birchcliff. I think all of you that have been around for 15, 20 years will know that. And that showed, again, those floods that were pretty dramatic in Birchcliff. There was Cliffside. I think there were a few areas north of Cliffcrest around Chine Drive. We had a 1 in 100 year flood in Birchcliff, or you had a 1 in 100 year flood in Birchcliff. And it showed that we do not have the capacity in that area to really, with combined sewers and all that, to have the right kind of capacity for a 1 in 100 year process. The city has been, and our water department has been on, and if you recall, you in your water rates were paying 9% increase over 9 years, then a couple of years of 5%, and a huge amount of money you were paying as part of your water rate fees. We realized 20 years ago in the city that we did not have the capacity and infrastructure in our water across the city. We just did not. This is historically before amalgamation. We didn't put the right kind of infrastructure money into our water and our sewer capacity. Out of that flood, and I think there were a couple of floods in the city within a year or two, the city again realized that, wow, we have a serious issue. We are now focusing, we're spending, you talk about that $300 million, it's actually $600 million or approximately citywide a year on trying to look at sewer capacity across the city. A lot of work is happening. So out of those studies, again, there were, I think, 69 studies that were started. We've done about, I think, 35 or 39 approximately. Out of that, there was a study for Birchcliff. Birchcliff, there was Cliffside, there was a whole area. I could get the map, all the information is there. And I know Hetty Corby, if she's on the line, has probably seen that. That study has suggested improvements to help sewer capacity and water in Birchcliff. We are beginning, again, yes, there have been some delays. I recognize there have been some delays, but the city is committed to looking at trying to resolve that issue all across the city, but in Birchcliff. So yeah, we're spending $300 million. And I'm hoping we can get to it as quickly as possible to be able to ensure proper sewer capacity. But again, let me reiterate, back with this particular development, no approvals will be made, regardless of whether we get the sewer capacity work done. They will not get approvals unless they can show and prove that this particular building has the capacity for water and sewage. They will not get
But
approved.
Gary, that's not what happens at council. You know that and I know that. Up at 2800 Kingston Road, I read the reports, the engineering reports said that the building would only use 1% of the total sewage capacity. It did not address how much of the capacity was already being used. And when it passed council, which you were on and you voted for, you just made it a condition that they satisfy the engineering department. Well, here we have a situation that's been extant since 2003. We've had an environmental assessment in 2010, which ran out. And so we have to do another one. And still nothing's getting done. The money hasn't been spent. The tenders haven't been let. And you're going to allow more buildings to be built. It's ass backwards. You shouldn't build a building if you don't have hydro. And you shouldn't build a building if you don't have sewage. And nor should you build a building if you don't have roads. Road capacity or school capacity. In Altree's own report, bought and paid for, indicates that Birchcliff is over capacity right now. That's in Altree's report. Read it. So what I say is directly to you and to the community, you shouldn't be building anything if you don't have the necessary infrastructure. Because all you're doing is overloading everybody and everything. It's, as external diseconomies on all of us. We all pay.
Yep. Appreciate that. And John, just to repeat, the necessary infrastructure will, before any permits, and that goes with 2800 Kingston Road, by the way. We did approve the overall zoning density, but we did not approve that site, and that site will not be approved as part of site plan application until there is proper sewage or water and sewage capacity in the area. We're still working on that. That could be years away. We're still not, they have not had their final permissions or permits, nor will Altree, until they provide the proper infrastructure in the community.
Okay, so I think John's point, it reflects another one of our asks, which relates to preventing the strain on our infrastructure and our environment. There have been a couple of questions that I've seen in the chat, Gary, about whether you can indeed fight for limiting the height of developments that come to this area. So I want to ask you the question sort of directly, like what is your capacity, to reshape these developments so that they are in line with the goals that were set, with the community, for the community in the Kingston Road Revitalization Plan? Are you able to effectively dismantle a developer's goals for having excess density the way that all of these developers seem to want to have in this community right now, because obviously it's a lucrative opportunity for them? Are you able to say, nope, this community wants to be, capped at 4 to 6 stories, absolute max, because that's what it wants for itself? Like what is your power to shape the community as that plan tried to shape us?
So we, and I'll speak collectively as a city, but myself included, do have the ability and the right to say, no, we have rezoned this for 4 to 6 stories, and that is all we want. And if you can't do that, you're out of luck. So we do have that right. We do have that ability. But recognizing, that is an overall right, and we could easily refuse anything other than that 4, and we're really probably 6 stories. And again, first of all, as I said, let me go back. If they didn't have those 2 houses on Birchcliff, they couldn't build the 9 stories. So if you don't approve the neighborhoods or those 2 houses, they're coming back with a 4 to 6 story. But recognizing the bigger part of the process, you have a growth plan that suggests you have to, and you have an official plan that works from the Planning Act of the province. You need to figure out where you can fit 30 to 50,000 people a year into your city, into your municipality. They will still have the right at some point, if we turn around and said, nope, after 6 months or a year, we're not going to do this, we're sticking to the 6 stories, they have the right to take this appeal. And they could make the argument for whatever reason. I don't even know what the arguments would be. It could be based on, the growth plan, the Planning Act, that you need to allow these 2 particular houses. We can easily say no to that. Then they can take that to a different process. And it's that process that concerns me as a city councillor, and it concerns the city, because I do know historically, and this is even before me being councillor, the OMB generally, I'll say generally, that it's the LPAT now, supported development. When you look at decisions that would have been made over a period of time, generally they support developers, rightly or wrongly. You go through this process, the city could fight it. And my concern, and this is the conversation we need to have with the community, we're having it tonight, but we'll continue to have that. As I said at the very beginning, it's important that we try to work through consensus as a partnership with the community, similar to what we did with Manderley, I guess, to come to some agreement that everybody can be happy with. So that's ultimately the goal. If we don't get to that point, the appeal process is a little sometimes unnerving. And I have seen developers who will take, again, not in my ward, but in other wards in the city, will take a development application to appeal. And not only will they get what they originally asked for, they end up getting more density. So I don't know whether or not this plan would warrant a successful appeal by Altree. I have no idea. I'm going to have to rely on city planning staff to inform me when we go through the process. And that's one of the conversations I'm going to be having with them is if we say no to this, do you think they can take this to appeal and win? Now, in their professional opinion, Anna and everyone else, if they say yes, I think they have a case. I'm coming back to you as a community going, folks, we need to solve this prior to that. So that's always a risk. Again, I've had one development, I forget which one it was on Kingston Road, that has gone to appeal. They ended up winning, they got exactly what they wanted. And it wasn't a big variation, so there wasn't an impact on the community, but I really get concerned about that next step, which is appeal, and the risk that's involved in it.
I mean, I just think the problem is you keep using Manderley as an example. So I feel like nobody can rely on that consensus building because I mean, like, we don't know who Altree is. So you haven't brought them into this neighborhood saying they're a responsible developer that cares about Birchcliff. Like, that's not what we're hearing about this group of folks. They're coming in and telling, you know, tenants that they're being moved before there's a proposal. They're like, there's a lot of stuff that makes us feel skeptical about a negotiation with this group of people. So I think the notion of consensus in this situation just feels untenable to most of us. And, you know, I feel free to disagree with me in the chat, and Gary, you can read the chat if people fundamentally disagree with that. But I think if there's been one theme that has occurred throughout all of our dialogues over the last few weeks, it's that people are fundamentally skeptical that we have to just keep giving and giving to developers because there's an inherent, like it's like they deserve to be greedy is really the way it kind of feels to the community. You know, it's like I don't think that's reasonable, and I think there is enough precedent, you know, in other fights that councillors have had against irresponsible development. And I think this is arguably very irresponsible development on a number of fronts. Just take the affordable housing removal as one example, and the environmental strain on another as another, just from a, official plan, like what, just looking at the official plan in the last few weeks, one of the things that struck me was that in addition to intensification being a goal, making choices that improve quality of life for residents is also a goal. But I feel like in these community consultations, we are constantly talking about the natural drive towards intensification. We are under prioritizing the conversation about quality of life. And I think what this community is saying robustly in a large group, there are 100 people on this call, and there were more people trying to get in because I realized I have a cap Zoom, and that's my fault. That there are many people on this call saying this is not healthy for this neighborhood, And so, we're really wanting to understand, not just as sort of like, I think we want you arguing our case, and so I guess, I'd like to kind of pivot this part of the meeting to talking about how you can argue our case, how you're going to take those 5 asks and bring them to life. And I think I can speak on behalf of a large percentage of people who came to the collective groups of asks on this call, that's what we're really hoping for from you at this point. So could we shift there, and maybe Patrice,
sure,
questions that relate to that?
So just quickly, Anna, I do understand the skepticism in the community. I feel it too. And that started, as I said to the community, I can't remember where or how I posted it, but I had this understanding with Altree that before you go out publicly, you do your website, you do anything on Facebook, sit down with the community, let's have some informal conversations. Don't just drop something on them like that. And I had that, agreement with them. They didn't do that. And that concerned me. Again, I haven't had conversations specifically with them. My staff have. And they recognize that. And I said, folks, the last thing you want is to, number one, get a councillor's back up But bigger, you do not want to get a community's backup because it doesn't help anybody going through this process. They agreed with that. And again, words are only words, Anna and everybody. And I'm only going for what they are telling me. They have, in their words, have committed to sitting down with you, the community, in the new year, recognizing there's been a misstep. They didn't start this process off well, but they have that commitment. So I have to give that at least to them. They need to sit down with all of you folks, and we'll have to figure out, again, and I'll work with you in the community association on the best way to do that. It would be, much be better to be able to go off to the church and have these little roundtables and charrettes and conversations. So we need to figure out a different way to do that on a small scale. And when I'm looking at those 5 asks, those are incredibly well thought out asks, and there's no reason why we cannot use that as a basis, so planning. So I will, I'll be in the planning, by the way. So I spoke with our planners. They know I'm meeting today. They weren't able to get on the meeting tonight. They will be reaching out also in the new year with you. So the hope is to be able to have conversations with city planning, whether it's Yishan or Christian, and the planners or Altree in the new year. I'm hoping January would be the best time to do that. And over the next couple of months, have these and figure out, and I'm actually coming to you, the community, on the best way to do that and figure out how we can do that, because I don't like the skepticism that's out there. And it's a justified skepticism from my point of view, because I have the same feeling you have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions that you want to pull up, Patrice, at this point?
Yes, actually, I'm just gonna, I just ask people to just ask me if they want to ask a question privately. So I'm gonna do this in order. We're gonna have Rob ask a question, then Gerard Arbor, and then we're going to go to Tracy, who's on the phone. So in that order, if we could do that, that would be great. Rob, you can go ahead.
Great. I just have a quick question for you, Gary. I last few weekends, we've been going around. I visited 450 homes in our neighborhood. And what I found was that most people were not aware of what was happening. So I would be on a doorstep, socially distanced, and I was telling them for the first time that a 12-story development was about to go up. So my question for you is this: can we use your email newsletter as a way to let people know, first of all, about this proposal, and second of all, about our group and what we're doing as a community to gather and make sure that our voices are heard? Would you be willing to let us use your newsletter to reach out to our Birchcliff community?
Yeah, 100%. Fully, Rob, I will do that. Now, so what I have in my ability to reach out to the community, like you, I'm on social media, and I follow all the groups in the area. So I have the ability through my Facebook. I do have an e-blast that goes out, sort of an e-newsletter that goes out every week. Now it goes out to about 3,000 people in the area. So I don't know, how many people on this call would actually get my email blast, e-blast, because you have to give me permission to do that. But so the other option is to look at, so I've been thinking, and again, in consultation with you, is to start, so one of the first things I was looking at doing is just doing a letter in my letterhead to the community. So I could easily do that. I mean, I was actually thinking of just doing Birchcliff and Lakeside initially to say, by the way, are you aware of this? So that was initially I was looking to, then I thought, doing the larger community. So again, that takes resources. It takes a bit of work. I'm more than willing, if the community is to do, if I have staff, we could go out and hand deliver something to the community. But recognizing too, the preliminary report that's coming January 6th, that actually begins the process of consultation. So out of that, a decision will be made that the developer or the city will do it, but they're responsible for doing a flyer out to the community. And I'm going to do the area from pretty much, probably from, Birchcliff all the way to Warden, north to Clonmore, south to the lake. So that's actually what's going to happen January 6th. So my hope is, and I'll have to find out when that happens. So they'll notify that broader community, because that's what the preliminary report is, to finally officially notify everybody else. But we still need to work on, again, getting over the holidays and figure out, I'm open to any opportunities or suggestions that you have to try to communicate as effectively as possible to as many people.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. If we could, Gerard, are you ready to ask your question?
Yep.
Okay.
First, I'll go back to the 100-year storm of 2013. 2013, I think it was. I'll have to dig up my receipts from my basement flood, but it was no coincidence that there was a new development at Midland and St. Clair shortly before that. So in the planning of the next generation of water drainage, again, hopefully they'll accommodate whatever happens to maybe potentially Eli Lilly. But again, things go downhill with the water department. Gary, just going back to 2009, 2010, when the first Kingston Road study came out, I was more involved with Cliffside, but the Birchcliff came out 2009. And the idea was to fix the heights of the developments to a reasonable height, to have developments that enhance and don't intrude on the community, and some kind of vibe along the neighborhood. You know, that was the big picture plan of it. And then 2013, the city unilaterally, you would know, you probably voted on it, to amend that original plan to introduce no fixed heights and then section 37 monies and that kind of thing. So the elephant in the room here is, this is a block long, 9 stories high. It's grossly obtrusive. People are having to move from 3 different apartments. I don't think this is part of anything that's visualized from 2009 in the original study. And now we're 11 years later, it just seems to be a very passive process on the part of the councillor and the city, and then downloading it to the province. So how do you feel about the elephant in the room, Gary? Honestly.
Thank you, Gerard. First of all, with regard to this property, it is pre-zoned, again, as everyone knows, to do a 4 to 6 story on the entire block. And I don't have the map in front of me, but so as part of the Birchcliff study, and there were amendments made to that, but it's still 4 to 6 stories. That has not changed on this particular block. So if a developer came in, they did 6 stories, they can put it in without any community consultation, because the community, in fact, 10 years ago agreed to that. With regard, and you talk about a passive process, and I appreciate your thoughts on that. There will be a very rigorous process, as has been most developments, you know, that I've been involved with on the ward, to ensure that there is consultation, that we are looking at every aspect of what this development or the impact will have on that. So that will absolutely happen. And again, with regard, you mentioned the larger storm. I don't know what, I'm trying to think what building happened on Midland St. Clair. That would have had no impact whatsoever on this storm. I don't think any development would have, you know, would have been there, would have been impacted.
It was a whole community of middle density homes put in, Gary, at Midland and St. Clair, where there used to be a driving range.
Yeah. No, I know that. And they had capacity. So they had capacity. When we're looking at capacity, they have to prove that they have capacity for a certain kind of storm. I don't know if it's a 1 in 35. There's the way they define what capacity is. And the capacity was there. Was there capacity for a 1 in 100-year storm? No. And that's, I mean, there are a lot of places in the city. That's why we're spending a couple $2 billion to put the sort of capacity into the entire city for the 1 in 100-year storm.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Tracy, you're on the phone. Do you want to ask your question? Tracy?
Tracy can unmute on the phone. Okay, Tracy, we'll come back to you if you can hear us. If you want to try to figure out how to unmute, we'll come back to you on the next question.
Yeah, there was, I can quickly put Frank in. We can do that now. Frank, do you want to go ahead?
Frank? I see him there and he's unmuted.
Okay. I'll send him a note here.
Hello? Can you hear
Frank.
me?
Yep.
We
Hi,
can hear you.
Frank.
Yep.
Okay, great. I just want to follow up on 2 points that John raised regarding this $300 million sewer project. It seems, I think, pretty obvious that what's behind that is not just remedying the basement flooding, obviously, but to add capacity. I mean, that certainly has got to be the cards at this price level, if you will. And certainly that would be capacity that's available and usable by developers along Kingston Road. So there's that to address. I mean, many of us here are skeptical that Kingston Road is not going to be turned into a canyon of condos, as I've heard it it's expressed. And that sewer capacity is surely a key piece. What exactly are the specs for this project? How much capacity does it add? Because surely it must. So how many units is that going to represent as added to the Kingston corridor? That'd be question one for the councillor. And the other point that John made was that certainly the infrastructure being in place in advance of the development is the way to go. Your sentiment or understanding from developers who have been in discussion with you, are they willing to wait that period out till it comes to a reasonable standard of proper infrastructure for any proposed development? That would be my second question. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. So with regard, so we're confusing, I think, two kind of issues here on sewer capacity. So pretend that no development is going to be taking place in the Birchcliff area, that there are no developers coming. And it is what it is, you know, because they're not looking at sewer capacity. The city's going to, so without any development, the city is still committed to dealing with the sewer capacity in Birchcliff and across the city. So that $300 million is part of a project in, you know, so the broader area to fix the sewer capacity regardless of any development. So that is a commitment the city's doing. With regard to developers and development that come in, so any development that comes into the ward or anywhere else in the city has to, so you want to do a development on Altree, you want to do development on Manderley or anywhere else, you have to prove and you have to actually ensure that you have the right kind of capacity, no matter what that means. It's a very strict guideline that you have to do. So it's a comment, we're doing both. We're going to be spending the $300 million, but any developer will have to show and prove that they have to have the capacity. And if it shows they don't have the capacity, they have to build the capacity themselves. And again, I'll go back to Manderley, and I apologize for using Manderley so many times, Anna, but Manderley, in fact, on that site, again, I don't have all the specs in front of me, but as part of the process showed that, you know, just connecting to the sewer, I guess, out on the street, there was not the capacity. So they actually had to build the capacity down the street. And I think it was to, sorry, it wasn't Warren, I think it was Birchcliff, at whatever cost it was to them. But that was the only way that city staff would support that development, is if they proved they had the proper capacity. So what they did actually, they provided capacity not only for themselves, but broader capacity for the community because of that connection over to Birchcliff. So they actually improved as their cost capacity in the community. But we will not approve anything, as I said before, without proving that there's proper capacity for those kind of that development. I think that was both questions, Frank.
No, actually, that's not a very satisfying answer. As I said, the suspicion must be that there's going to be added capacity built into this $300 million project. And that can only conceivably be to service developers planning to densify Kingston Road.
No, so I have to disagree with you. No, we don't look at that. We look at, I mean, you look at the flood that happened, you know, we from the city's perspective, I mean, the capacity was not appropriate, you know, for there and other areas. This is not just the city. Out in Tobico, we had a lot of challenges. So the city recognizes that we have a responsibility. That's why you guys paid these water fees and these increases for so many years. So we are now investing that money you gave to the city as part of your fees back into a you know, a complete water and sewage system. We don't do this for developers at all. We do this because we need, because if there's no development happening in Birchcliff, we'd still be spending that money because that's money that has to be spent.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that explanation, because it can't be that you're going to spend this sort of money without trying to get something back from it.
Well, again, with respect, Frank, I mean, what we want to get back out of it is a sewer capacity, water capacity for the residents who, you know, you're paying in many respects out of your water.
What number of residents, though? That's the question. You can design and build for any scale. Is this project for the current scale alone, or some future higher value of scale?
So actually, that's a good question. I wish I can't answer that. That's probably a question that I think our planners will have to answer. I will note that, but that question I can't actually answer. But it's a good question.
But I mean, how soon would that answer be available? Because this project's been announced as almost virtually on the eve of it commencing, it seems.
No,
How
so
far
again,
out is this project?
let me reiterate, we are at the very, very beginning of this process. We are not to the point where it's advancing, where any decisions are going to be made. In fact, I don't think you'll find a decision being made for 2 years on this particular application. So there is plenty of time to have those conversations, and I will be committing to you in the community in the new year to be able to have another forum similar to this where we have those experts to be able to answer those specific questions. I will make that commitment, but we have a long road ahead of us on this particular application.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Gary, I
Yes.
see this question has come up a couple of times, and I'm just going to kind of read it to you. It says, who approves Section 37 funds allowing the developer to add 2 more stories? And can the community say no thanks?
So who determines that? That is a process that is determined through our planning department. It's a negotiation actually that takes place with the developer. Councillors, so my office is very actively involved in that, and primarily because, you know, I represent the voice of the community. So I'm involved in that, but it's really a negotiation that happens with the developer as part of the process. So when this rezoning application, whatever it is, comes in 2 years, that will have been negotiated. And there are certain standard rates. So they look at what the number one, they'll look at the Manderley down the way, which is $500,000. They look at the cost per square foot, and there's kind of a formula that will indicate generally how much money that is. We, from the city's perspective, and you always push to try to raise more money. But that's kind of the process with Section 37. Do they have the ability to say, no, we don't want to do that? Yes, as I said before, we ultimately have the ability to say no. They could, say, well, that the city says no because we don't agree with the Section 37. Then they could take it to appeal, and as part of the appeal process, they may get the approvals, but there will be no Section 37. In fact, there's new provincial legislation that is changing that will actually change that kind of the ability for cities and municipalities to get Section 37 money. It's kind of changed. I don't know, but I think it's Bill 108 that the province did last year. So that's going to be enacted, I think, in 2 or 3 years. That actually changes the city's ability to look at park fees along with Section 37 fees. But we're not in that environment yet. So again, depending on where this goes.
Meaning there will no longer be kind of community fees given to communities for larger scale developments?
Yes, it's cut back drastically. So again, it's the Section 42, which is the parkland dedication, along with Section 37. And there's a few other development fees that, again, hence why it's better if a planner can answer that. But yes, the overall impact will mean the ability to negotiate community benefits will be drastically reduced. In fact, it gives more weight to, I guess, a developer.
Can I ask if, as budget chief, that's something that you're fighting?
Again, that is, of course, I mean, any opportunity to get more fees in there. The city does not agree with that, and we have stated very clearly to the province that we do not support that. So council, and I'm sure it was a unanimous vote, we do not approve of, I think it's Bill 108. So we have already communicated that to the province. At this point, they're still moving forward with.
And that could come into effect at the same time that this development is coming to fruition?
Well, no. So yeah, I mean, there's a time. I think it has to go to final reading, and I think that's happening, as I'm hearing, around the end of 2021. So there's that potential. Yes, that say this development ends up being a 9-story for whatever reasons, that may challenge the ability to do Section 37. Again, I will have to defer to a planning expert to give the specifics, but it is plausible that they could. Now, again, the conversations I know planning haven't, I haven't had those conversations. We don't even begin the conversation on Section 37 for a period of time until we really get a sense of what this final product may look like or not.
Okay.
Patrice, do you think we're getting close to the end of the questions you've seen, or are there folks that still have their hands up?
I think pretty much it's more of commentary at this point, although Tracy is back online, back on the phone, so she could be our last question. And then I would like, if we could invite Claire from Acorn to give a little shout out at the end.
Great.
Okay. So Tracy, if you're on the phone, are you okay? Can you ask us your question?
Just give it a minute. Maybe she's having, if she's on the phone, there may be a problem with unmuting. Just give it one more minute.
What I'll also do, Anna, I mean, if Tracy can't get the question in, if people want to write in their questions to you, forward them to me, and I can forward them off to our, our planning staff to hopefully be able to answer some of the questions as soon as possible, if we can't get them answered here tonight.
Right. Okay, Claire, do we want to move to you? Are you there?
Karen, do you know if Claire is still on the on our call?
No, actually, I'm not sure if she's still on.
So maybe you can let everybody know what's happening on Friday?
Yeah, so basically, Councillor, we've joined forces with Toronto Acorn. Actually, they approached us when the news broke out of what's happening with Lenmore, and they are really behind us in our efforts to stop the displacement of the tenants and the eviction in general. So we've been canvassing and petitioning the area with rallies, and we're going to have another one on Friday at 1 p.m. Right here in front of Lenmore Court. And we'd like to invite you to join.
Sure. Again, I'll have to look at the timing and all of that. I've supported Acorn, the organization, in the past. And, good on you doing this work with the community. And if I can make it, again, I'll just have to, if somebody can email me on the specific times if I have the availability. I'm in sort of getting in my budget period season, so I do have limited ability, but if I can make it out, I will.
Thank you.
Tracy's back.
Tracy, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me now? I'm so sorry, everyone.
We can hear you. No problem. Go for it.
I'm so sorry.
Go for
Hi,
it.
Gary. My name's Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, I am a resident here at Lenmore Court for over 20 years. And I love my home here. As you said, we all know why we came here. And because we love it, this is what we like. Now, I'm just wondering, I've gone through a lot. I came here from a very bad times and settled myself here to be stable. And I'm so proud of it for 20 years. Gone back to school, and I've gotten some legal schooling also. And I'm just wondering what I've been taught about Section 53 of the Residential Tenancies Act is not being applied to the first right of refusal for us to exercise this. Now, also, you mentioned that you would be more prone to side with what the city planner states rather than what Altree states. But I'd like you to know that the city planner was in the Zoom meeting with Altree, telling all of the tenants that you will not be allowed to come back here. So that makes me very skeptical also. Now also, you asked Altree to do just one thing for you, and that was to get back to you before posting the information. They defied that. They already showed bad faith in posting that and not even getting back to you. My concern, Gary, mainly, for some reason, I'm thinking it's 12 stories that they're wanting to build, but only 9 stories are going to be shown on Kingston Road because of the way that the ground goes in the back. But Altree is also the owner of the Days Inn development. Now, I'm wondering why on earth they would be allowed to move us somewhere else until Days Inn is even built. Like, why wouldn't they have to build that first and then put us all there directly? Now, they have 4 empty units in our buildings that they're refusing to rent out to any tenants anymore. And they're just hoping, we're feeling it's intimidation tactics. They're just, the less people to fight with, the less of a fight themselves. I do have one question also, Gary, about these sections, section 40, 45 and 37. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Sorry. So that's, or sorry, section 42 and section 37. You had stated that when the developers go beyond what the proposal and approval was on the height and density of the developments, then they are in breach. And am I right to say that they're fined, say, a monetary $500,000 for breaching the contract, basically?
I wouldn't say breach, but if they go beyond what their allowances are, in essence, they have to pay for that right to do that, which is a community. That's kind of
right. So that leaves me to wonder that these developers are millionaires, so they don't care about any monetary little fine that they're going to get if they can slap on 4 or 5 more stories onto a building. Is there nothing in force that will enforce the proper development of what is stated and not go beyond?
So with regard, so enforce, again, they have, first of all, they do have a right to put in an application. As I said, if the application was to follow the zoning, we wouldn't be having this conversation tonight because they get the approvals, but they have the right to put in an application, which is really an official plan amendment, which is the 2 houses, plus a rezoning, which is they want to go higher. So they have the right to do that. We do have the right of refusal, but we have to go through this process to determine where the city will be, where the community will be, where they will be that. In the event, and again, I'm not suggesting in any way that the city would support going beyond 6 stories, but again, just in the application that's before us at 9 or 10 stories with the mechanical, there's a fee that they will have to pay. And that needs to be negotiated. I mean, I can't tell you whether or not that's $500,000 or $1 million or whatever the number is, but a number will be negotiated. And so I just want to answer your other 2 questions too. With regard to, I don't necessarily side with the planner, but what I do is I take advice from our planners, our city planners. I always take their advice. They're a good group of people that work incredibly hard. So I will always defer to them for advice, but ultimately the decision will be mine and city councils to make. So I don't necessarily side with them, but I take their advice and I do value the advice that they give me. And the answer to the last, section 53, as I said, this is new to me with this rental renovations and all that. So I don't actually know what section 53 is. As I said, I'm hoping the next time we talk, I'll know what that is.
Well, if I may just quickly cite it to you, it's section 53, subsection 2. A tenant who exercises a right of refusal may reoccupy the rental unit, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you do have the right to go back to the unit.
Right. So at first the landlord, the owner had told me, you're going to come back here, you're going to love it, you're going to have ensuite laundry, it's going to be beautiful. And then he changed his tune and told me, no, you must have been mistaken. I told you were going up the road, which I know I'm not. And he told me, why do you even want to be here? It's going to be 3 moves and it's only going to be for the view. Well, this is my home. I want to be here. I came specifically here 20 years. I don't want to move up to Glen Everest area. I don't want to be near Glen Everest. I don't want to be at the Daisy. And I would have moved there 20 years ago had I preferred that neighborhood, right?
And I recognize that, and I recognize, yes, you do have those rights. And I just wanted to comment too. So when I did have that initial conversation with Altree a number of months ago, they did state as part of their vision is what they wanted to do is, this is a long 2 or 3 year process, but their goal was to tear down the Days Inn and develop and put up the new building on the site prior to them developing all the one over on Birchcliff. So what they said is we'll build the Days Inn, and then you know that the people who are living down the street would just move down the street into new units. That's what their initial conversation with me is. And again, even just talking to our planning department, just the ability to do that. You know, we don't even know if they can do it, but that was, they did, and I wouldn't say promise to me, but that was their initial intent when I spoke with them before that. I now still need to sit down with planning whether or not that's possible. As I said, this is a very large project. It's not just in Birchcliff, but it's also over on the Days Inn site. So this is a very large project that has a long way to go. And you folks at Glenmore do have rights. And I'm going to be
what would happen, Gary, if what happened to the Manderley happened to the Cliffside property? and the tenants were already out of Birchcliff, what would happen to the tenants and their rights?
Well, so again, I don't want to confuse site plan as opposed to the zoning. So ideally, if you do the permissions on the zoning, which is the first process, that takes care of all the big issues on, with the tenants, if they're going to be moving over. And again, there's still the possibility that the
But could they
developer.
flip it? Could they flip it and the tenants not have those protections anymore?
No. So as I said, and again, I have to get the specific advice from staff, but as I recall, no, they would not be able to. So that zoning, that first decision will actually have all the rights of the tenants in that. The site plan application doesn't deal with that. It's more, I wouldn't say cosmetic, because there are some big challenges on the site plan application process, but that the rights to the tenants are embedded in the first decision, so that you wouldn't have them flipping it and then turning around and changing what they wanted to do. I'll have to confirm with staff, but I'm pretty sure that.
Yeah, I think our biggest concern, I mean, from a tenant perspective, there are so many concerns, but I think, this is not a kind of demolish and replace on site situation. And I think, we are asking questions of the planning department for examples of when indeed this kind of development, this kind of like shuffle up the street, has worked appropriately and safely for tenants. I think that's something we're going to be looking to your office to really better understand, because, I think there are many people who would quite reasonably think that this is a really, relatively clever strategy for blockbusting, and so I want to make sure that, tenants don't, get a little bit of compensation to go find, a local apartment while they wait for the other thing to be built, and then suddenly have no access to those rights after they're off site. What happens if the company that owns that development goes bankrupt? During that intermediary period? I think there are so many questions about being shuffled up the road and that interim period. And I just want to bring one kind of human story to the table just before we get close to wrapping up, which is, I know I've heard many tenant stories in the last number of weeks, but one of them that really struck many of us is of an elderly woman who's lived there for many decades, who can't talk about this move, and particularly is so stressed at the notion of having to find some kind of temporary accommodation, in addition to leaving her home. And so, I just kind of want to leave the meeting with, just a reassertion of the human stories that are being, and the people that are being impacted by this development. This cannot be a conversation about intensification and a developer's market interest. It really can't. This neighborhood, and this is not just any other development in the neighborhood. It's a development in a neighborhood that's erasing affordable housing in our community. And so I think, we really need to know, I think, what the commitments are on all 5 of the asks. As we leave this meeting, what will you commit to? And I'm going to ask one more question. In addition to our 5 asks, I'm going to ask that you continue to consult with us as a group, rather than just to convene new and small groups. And that's because we have effectively organized as a community. We have a very good cross-section of representation and a lot of different political viewpoints in this group. And there are many different interests at play here. And I think we have been very effective in organizing those interests. And so I would ask that you come back to this group rather than start a new group again.
Also, so quickly, and when I say I'm coming back smaller or conversations, that's actually so my intent is to work with the group. You as a community association, I know there's another one that has formed over in it's the Cliffcrest Scarborough Village Community Association. As I said in my remarks, you as a community association have the best opportunity to speak as one voice. That's hugely important as part of the process. So as I move forward, of course, I'm going to be working with you, because you bring not only the resources, but the human resources and the connectivity with the community. You bring the respect of the community, in fact. So I think working with you is a given. I'll be working with everybody who contacts my office, but I think your ability, and it's also your ability as an organization to work with staff. So I've had conversations with our city staff who, number one, they're working their asses off with regard to the pandemic on planning. So they appreciate, again, the ability, I mean, they try to respond to everything that people send to them. But when you have 100 people sending the same question to them, the same kind of questions over and over, it takes up a lot of time for them to be able to answer appropriately. With one large voice, if you could, and again, that's why they would be very eager to have these conversations in the new year in this format with
phones were
you.
dying, then it was my turn to
So
talk, and I couldn't unmute it. I had to go up
So
to
you-
Becky.
Great,
Anyway,
Tracy, I think you're unmuted now. I'll try to mute you. I've got you, no problem.
Anyway, so I just
Great.
wanted to end that, no, your voice is incredibly important. That voice will be, very much a part of that, because I think you are, from what I'm seeing, in fact, we have so many people out here tonight, and in just the chatter I see on Facebook myself, I think you've built a very strong coalition of people who represent the community, and that voice is critically important and part of the process.
Okay, and I think the final question, just as we move to close the meeting, is how will you fight for the ask of this group? What are your specific commitments before we close this meeting?
Well, as I said, my specific commitments are to bring each one of those 5 asks to the process. So I'll be sitting down with our city planning. I'll actually be having conversations with Altree. As I need to be doing that. I mean, again, and I will want to have Altree, come here, whether city planning come or not. And I want you to ask them the same questions that you're asking me. My commitment to you and the community is to work, and these are reasonable expectations. These are reasonable asks to work with you in supporting that. So I'm hoping that, I'll be bringing these, again, I don't even know if there's a representative of Altree on the call tonight. They could or not be, so I'm not too sure. But if they are on there, I'll be having a conversation with you in the new year about these asks. You need to be reaching out to the community to have those same conversations that we're having here tonight.
In the new year.
But my commitment is already there for all of this with you.
Okay. And I'm just going to end with, I think, our expectation, which is that this is more than a vote against. This is where I think we're expecting you as a community to dismantle the problematic parts of this development and to make it, if there's going to be development there, it's going to adhere to those asks. Then I think we're going to be very firm on pursuing those asks as a team. I think we are standing together as a group of neighbors, and we just really want you to kind of understand that. We respect that you've come out tonight and spent time answering questions, and are grateful to you for your time. And thank you to everybody who made the time to be participant this evening. Thank you to Rob for introducing the meeting. Thank you to Patrice for coping with me through the technical challenges that is Zoom. And if anyone knows someone that did not get into this meeting because of the 100-person cap, I have recorded this meeting for community members who couldn't make it, so I can make that available to them as well, so they have the information from this dialogue. And I apologize. That was a failure on my behalf, so thank you, and I'm sorry. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Everybody.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Bye, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.